everybody, and welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, but not just any fantasy today, because today I'm really excited. This has been a long-awaited episode for me. I feel like I've been so greatly enjoying the Liveship Traders trilogy by Robb and Hobb, and I've just been nonstop reading through the trilogy, and we're only now finally getting to talk about Book 2, Mad Ship by Robb and Hobb, Book 2 of the Liveship Traders. And I'm already well into Book 3 now, and it's been a while since I've read this. We've just had so much other stuff to talk about in the meantime, and I'm super excited to finally get into it.
I'm super excited too, Charles. And we've felt that talking about these Robb and Hobb books in a lot of ways have been a return to form for us, and we had so much passion in that discussion of Book 1, and I think we're going to be bringing the same to our discussion of Book 2 here. So, Charles, should I give my patented spoiler warning here? I mean, is it Book 2?
It's Book 2. I think safe to say, before we get too deep into it, my quick statement, my spoiler-free statement for those of us listening that haven't read the book. The series continues to impress from Book 1. It continues to build on these characters who at this point have just been enrapturing for me. I'm just so invested in characters like Kenneth and Malta and Wintro and Althea and Paragon. It's just the more we get clued into what these characters are up to, just the more invested I become. And you can tell there's so many layers we still have to go. Robb and Hobb only hints at some of the origins and motives of these characters. So I'm super excited to kind of get deeper into that in this discussion. But I thought a very strong middle book, and I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think character, it goes without saying that Robb and Hobb kills it when it comes to character. All the things that we loved about the rotating point of view that we think has made this series even stronger than the Farseer trilogy. I think you'd still agree on that, right, Charles? And
correct.
I think that all of that stuff continues. Hobb continues to shine those ways. But something that really impressed me in this book is Robb and Hobb doesn't get a lot of credit for her world building, per se. You don't ever really hear people lauding, that Robb and Hobb world building. But as it's, I think, unfolding in this kind of slow burn pace, the mysteries of the world are starting to unravel a little bit, and it's been really exciting and interesting to learn about these things, and things that have been kind of foreshadowed from the start of Book 1 are starting to come to fruition a bit, and we're only at the end of Book 2 right now, so I'm sure the end of the trilogy will bring even more answers and reveals in this way. But I just want to say, for those of you who love to sink your teeth into some awesome world building, Hobb really impressed me in this one. And I'm not a person who goes off on world building very often. I'm
right.
more of a character focused reader. But I was geez, she's got me really interested in figuring out how all of this works. And we'll get into more of that in our once we get into the spoilers. But I just thought that would be a good thing to mention up top.
I totally agree. I think now we're just ready to dive into it. So ye be warned, all who enter at this point. All right.
This is why I have the patent for the spoiler warning. Yeah. So
I'm
for
sorry
those of you
stepped on your turf.
Yeah, it's all right. For those of you who haven't yet read Ship of Magic and The Mad Ship, the first 2 books of the Liveship Traders trilogy, you have now been warned. As Charles said, we are going to do a deep dive into the first 2 books here, with obviously a focus on Mad Ship, but spoilers abound. We of course won't get into any spoilers for the final book in this series, Ship of Destiny, so you're safe here if you just read the first 2, but if you haven't, then now's a good time to turn this down in your headphones.
Well said, Dylan, and I'm so excited to finally jump into the spoilers. We have not talked about this book much at all, really, and as we were preparing for this episode, so I'm super excited to finally talk about one of these early scenes. I've mentioned in a couple episodes that there's moments where I was just in awe of Hobb's writing at certain points in this book. And one of them happens right in near the beginning, of course, and that is Wintrow on the Vivacia with Captain Kennett running the show. And one of the things that happens is, one, the dynamic between Wintrow and his dad, which it's so incredible to watch that completely fall apart. And Robinov has always had that dramatic ability to make something so sad and something fall apart so completely be so poetic and gripping. But then also the scene where Wintrow cuts Kennett's leg off could find a home in any horror book ever. It is so revolting and so terrifying and so gripping. I was like, this is why we say she's a master, because I was just absolutely in awe of that chapter, which I believe is called The Pirate's Leg? Something like that.
I was just looking for it in my
Kindle.
My gosh. There is a chapter called The Pirate's Leg, so I'm just checking to see if that's where it goes down. But
maybe it goes down in Bonds, actually. Yeah, I mean, I was like, oh my gosh. This whole, it's a relatively long segment with a lot of detail, where he's operating on Kennett, and they had built this up. Kennett was trying to avoid it, and Wintrow had this whole thing of, well, if he dies, I'm useless to this crew. I'm gonna die. I need to find a way to protect myself, and he's still trying to find a way to protect his father, and that ultimately gets to a point. Yeah, it's in the chapter called Bonds, where he removes the it's chapter 4, where he cuts off the leg. And it's incredible, because there's about 3 chapters of build up to this, and then it happens, and it's describing him cutting the leg, and people are throwing up, and Kennett's screaming, and Wintrow's never done this before, and all the detail, and it's a masterclass.
A total masterclass. Yeah, I mean, you said it so well with placing it in a horror novel. It would be completely at home. I mean, I don't know how Hobb manages to shift gears so well in between all the different elements of this book, because there's parts of it that are just what do they call it? Either way, it's just politics of Bingtown, and you're dealing with some things about etiquette and stuff like that, and she makes that seem so important. And then you jump over to this just visceral scene of someone cutting through another character's leg, and both of these characters so well, and it just I don't know how she does it. It is a gripping scene. And I also really I mean, we can stick here for a second if you want to, Charles, but I really enjoyed that poetic, I don't know if it comes immediately after, I don't think it does, where it's kind of like Kennett in the in between between life and death for a little bit there too. You remember, but anyway, yeah, amazing scene. totally grounds you in this horrific, bloody scene where another author could just like, okay, and then like cut through his leg and he screamed and blah blah blah. And it's like, no, Hobb makes a spectacle of the situation. And then it goes on to this, I just thought, such a poetic way of putting it, where Hobb leads us to this, like, okay, Kenneth's freaking out, and then he gets calmed down some by Vivacia, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this line, and it's the tense muscles of his face and his back eased. Kenneth took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He did not draw another one. It's like, what? Wait. Like, are you saying he's like, dead? And then I think it's like chapters pass where you're like,
yes.
Wait.
I mean, she just leaves you hanging, like, dude. It's so brutal. It's like, what? Yeah. You're going to potentially kill the most, probably a leading favorite of as far as characters go. And have us read through so many chapters about Bingtown and Ronica and Malta, and just to bring us back. I had the same thought. I was like, man, she knows what she's doing. She's leaving you. She's got you hooked. Could not be any more engaged. And that's when she switches settings, chapters.
I know. And you're like,
he keeps you going.
You're like, oh my God, they killed Kenneth. You bastards.
You bastards. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And he does, to her credit, like, he does kind of like die for a moment there. He like is somehow melded with the ship, and then some similar thing happened to Wintro, right? Where he like was, when he got his finger amputated, he went into the ship, and then he had to be like pushed back out or something like that. I forget how that worked, but it was foreshadowed. Like, we had seen a similar scene with Wintro. It's like, oh, she can absorb some of the pain, and he can have more of an out-of-body experience with something like an amputation. But we go from a finger to a whole leg, and it's like, okay, we've escalated this dramatically, and I could do a whole episode on this freaking this section of a chapter where Wintro cuts Kenneth's leg off, and just how good she sets it up and sets the tone and layers in some of those horror elements. It's so fun to me. It's like, if Robin Hobb wanted to, she just like unleashed her pure like grim dark fantasy side, could write amongst, some of the most horrific scenes in fantasy, give Christopher Buehlman a run for his money, but she chooses to only do it like once or twice. Like, she doesn't do it that often, and she'll hit you with the gut punch. Like, we have other characters go through some pretty horrific stuff kind of off camera, but she'll play those cards and then not play them for hundreds of pages. It's like she knows how to. It's like, I'm not writing a horror book or a grimdark book. I'm writing a book about these characters, and sometimes scary grimdark stuff happens to them. The restraint I find really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, restraint in some areas, and then in other areas we get lines like, he turned the blade at an angle, slicing himself a flap of skin from the stump before he made the final severing cut and rolled the rotten remains of the leg aside. He looked down, sickened at what he had wrought. This was not a neatly sliced piece of meat like a holiday roast. This was living flesh. It's like, Hobb, like, just, do you have to compare it to meat? Do you have to be like rolling rotten remains? It's like, this stuff is, it's like straight out of like a torture scene from Abercrombie or from Joe Abercrombie or something like that.
There's a moment he set the shining blade to the swollen flesh and drew it across and down. Nothing had ever prepared him for that sensation. He had helped with butchering at slaughter time at the monastery. It was not a pleasant task, but it had to be done. Then he had cut through cold meat that was still, that was solid and stiff from a day's hanging. Kenneth's flesh was alive. It Its fevered softness gave way to the keen edge of the blade and closed up behind it. Blood welled up to hide his work. He had to grasp Kenneth's leg below the spot where he cut. The flesh there was hot, and his fingers sank into it far too easily. It's like, oh my good God. Like, what is going on? And that's just the warm-up. We haven't even, that's just the first cut. Like, we haven't even gotten into the rest of it. I mean, it's gnarly stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Robin Hobb knows how to leave an impact, and this one, we all leave with a little part of ourselves left behind after reading
so
that
true.
one. Kenneth most of all. So it is interesting though. You mentioned that Wintrow also had an amputation on Vivacia. That's his finger. There's something going on here with the Wintrow Kenneth parallels, and even explicitly, there's lots of times where Kenneth just thinks to himself like, the boy is so much like me. Yeah. It's so interesting along the lines of some of what we've talked about last episode around this idea of Wintrow, like when you're in his internal monologue, you think of him very positively, it feels like. And then some of his external behaviors don't always align with his point of view chapters and how he thinks of himself. And if anything, the external behaviors sometimes make him look worse. And then I've been thinking a lot about Kenneth and how his point of view chapters, it's like the opposite, right? Like his point of view chapters are like, this man is so despicable, I cannot stand him. And then from other people's point of views, he's like, his actions can make him look like, charming, charismatic, like a hero. Like he saves people who are enslaved, and he does make a lot of
charming
decisions
Vivacia.
In terms of
saying nice things to his girlfriend, and in his inner monologue, he's calling her a whore. It's like crazy.
It's wild. But I mean, a lot of his external behaviors are horrible, but a lot of his external behaviors are not horrible when he could choose to be. And it's almost like the opposite of like some other characters we've seen where they're like so horrible externally, and then their internal monologue is always like justifying everything they're doing. They still think they're a good person. It's like Kenneth is kind of the opposite. He's like always, it's not that he's beating himself up about being a bad person, but his thoughts are so callous and so
he is such a sociopath that he knows how to influence other people, and if to influence someone is to like romance them or flirt with them or be nice to them or even like save it, he's like, oh, we gotta save some slaves to boost morale. He doesn't actually care about any of them, but the actions are positive ones, and that's a really interesting point. It's Kenneth's character and the way Hobb has slowly introduced new layers to Kenneth in this book fascinates me. Like even in this leg cutting scene, I think this is the first time we get the first clues of like the origins of Kenneth's like sociopathic behaviors. Is when there's a moment where he's still getting his leg cut off. He goes, his eyes opened momentarily, and Kenneth babbled wildly. Please, please, I'll be good. I promise. I'll listen and obey. I will. Like out of context. Like he's delirious in pain, and he's begging and saying he'll be good. And that's really early in the book, right? It's chapter 4. And that gets you down the path of this could explain why someone would have this sociopathic tendencies. Why there's also moments where the charm is like, oh, you like him, you like Wintrow, like romantically, like including moments like that. It's almost this like cycle of abuse parallel that we get that I find to be a really interesting facet to his character, and the fact that he doesn't mention it at all in his inner monologues in any conversation ever, and we are just getting the tiniest scraps of information from context and from the wristband it's such a good way for Robin Hobb to stay true to Canada. He would never admit these things. He would never think about them, but they're still a part of him, and they're still affect who he is today, and he hasn't shaken it completely. And somehow we're able to get that without the character just telling us, oh, he's not going to think about that, not again. He's promised himself he'd stop the last time, and you're like, okay, well, now we know. But you found a different way to do it in the narrative. It's incredible.
Yeah, it is incredible. And I mean, this is something where he's almost definitely been sexually abused as a child by a man, it seems like, because it's
Egrot the pirate is like the person that he mentions later in the book when they go to his his secret town where he stashed his mother away. I was like so absorbed in that chapter. I was like, I've never read anything like this in my life. But that's when you start to learn about Egrot the pirate and the abuse that Kenneth had went through and how it's twisted him into being this person eerily similar. Right.
Well, yeah, but it's like, so you have those moments of the charm being like, oh, are you going to do to Wintro what he did to you?
Right.
I mean, Egrot. And he's like, one way or another, he's basically like, no, I'm not going to do that. And I think that it's, I don't know. I feel like Kenneth, you are starting to learn, like you said, why he is the way that he is. But to me, it reads as very protective over a part of him deep down that does still want to do good and be a good person. And maybe I'm giving Kenneth too much credit here, but I don't know. It's like at too many opportunities, he seems to still do what's best for other people, even though his justifications for why he's doing it are so awful. And right. I don't know. I'm like, is there? So he, I don't know. He takes Kyle right to this island that you were talking about, and he basically just leaves him there. And he could have killed him. He could have lied to Wintro. He could have done whatever he wanted. But he goes back and he's like, this is what you wanted me to do. You said you wanted him gone and but not dead.
Not killed.
And then
which is such a Wintro thing. It's like, oh, I don't want him dead, but I also never want to see him again. And it's like, bro, what are you talking about?
Then someone did exactly what you said you wanted. And then, and then you're like, no, how could you? But we know you're happy, Wintro. Wintro, then barely thinks about his dad the rest of the book. So it's, but anyway, I think, there's all these little opportunities where Kenneth says he's going to do something terrible. He's like, oh, I might have to kill him because he's getting, he's questioning me too much or whatever. Sorkor, right? He thinks that.
Sorkor, it's he does that.
He's like, he'll never do that. He's he's not right. He's not shown any willingness to follow through on just doing these cruel Machiavellian things for the sake of it. At the level of killing other people, or he's like, oh, I'm gonna have to get rid of Edda or whatever. And then it's does he ever do that? Then they actually get to Bingtown or Divvytown, wherever they get, that he's like, oh, she could leave here and then we could just move on. And then he's talking to Charm. And Charm is like, oh, you're going to make her go? And he's like, no, she's got to do it of her own free will. It's he always, when push comes to shove, he's not doing all these horrible things.
He has his own code. If he could just force people to do stuff, he would. But he's so concerned about the image of it, right? He's like, I don't want to force them to do it, but I will manipulate the situation to where they decide they're gonna do it. That's his fine line. He's not gonna put a sword to their throat and be like, do this thing, but he is going to pretend to be more affectionate than he really feels to try and influence people, or he's going to, save free slaves even though he doesn't care at all. It's that interesting duality, and that whole scene when he does keep his word to Kenneth, and he's like, oh man, I'd really hate to have to kill this guy. Wintrow would never know. Like, obviously we all know it would be better if he was just dead, but I'm going to do this other thing. And that other scene too reads like a freaking horror movie, where he locks Kyle in that cellar underneath the house, and he's describing how Egret came in and like tortured his whole family and cut her mom's tongue out, and then he goes out on the boat with that other priest, and he like is trying to kill him, and the priest is like clinging to the boat and being like, no, wait. And then he still just keeps stabbing him. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. And the book never gets that dark again. It's just like, dang, these are two like really dark scenes. We're really going there, and that's it. Then we're good. I was shocked.
Yeah, it is,
and then again we get that all that stuff about. I find that backstory of Kenneth being an abused child to be, an interesting part of his adult self, because he doesn't think about it at all. And that seems to be a theme in this book, because we have another character that goes through like abuse and sexual assault as well. It's just like, it's a lot in this book to deal with. It's a lot.
Yeah, it is definitely a lot. And I guess we spent like so much of the last episode talking about Kenneth, and then the episode went like forever. So
right.
I guess I'm sure we'll be returning. I just want to say one thing.
Yeah.
Just like, I can't figure Kenneth out, which is why he's so interesting. I mean, that's also why we can have conversations for so long about it. But there's this thing that stuck out to me about when he goes back to see his mom, and he's like, years ago her tongue had been cut out. Although he had nothing to do with that and had sincerely deplored it at the time, over the years he had come to see it was not an entirely unfortunate incident. She still talked endlessly, or tried to, but since the event, he could steer the conversation as he wished it to go. He told her when she agreed with him, and when a topic was settled, as now. And it's like, he just, and there's a point later in the chapter too, where he's, what's he do? He like does that very blatantly. I don't know if I highlighted it, but he's just like trying to leave, and she's like not able to actually talk, but she's making sounds trying to talk to him, and then he's just like, yes, I'll like it's something like stupid. It's like, I'll get you those plates you need or whatever. And it's like, she's clearly not talking about that. Whatever she's worried about is not the... And
or like, she doesn't want him to go. She doesn't want to be alone. She doesn't know these strangers he's dumping in her home. Like, it's sad, you feel sadness for this poor woman who has been abandoned basically to this island, and Kenneth's like trying to protect it. He's like, this is my little village, and you will live here, and you will live here. It's crazy. It reminds me of when he was walking through Divvytown at the beginning of the first book, and I was just totally like drawn into the crazy behaviors he was exhibiting there too. It's really interesting. And like, who would have thought we were going to get a chapter where it's like, and this is my mom. You're like, what? And it's mom? The hell?
Yeah, it's wild. And wasn't part of the reason he was going to the island, like, there was a girl on the ship who was like not able to do her part or something, and he left her with his mom, right? To like,
he left a couple there to like to help around the house, and like they could start their family there. Was something like that.
Ankle or something, like the name of some.
Yeah, and then he took the priest there so he could kill the priest.
Yes.
So, I mean, Kenneth is like, if anyone that wants to be like a leader, like you have to have a little bit of that sociopathic, like, oh, this actually is kind of convenient. I can do what I want now. And you're like, wow, you're sick in the head, bro. But I mean, he deals with some really tough stuff, and he's able to deliver, and he wins over a lot of people in this book, and Wintrow helps him. Like Wintrow is a prisoner. he was captured by this guy and is won over by him. Wintrow, the like most hardest person to influence ever, because he's took one like debate class and thinks he can argue with anybody pretty much. So
it's wild.
And I'm trying to think of where we end up with Kenneth. They go to the serpents, and it's the serpent she who remembers is rescued, and there's the serpent stuff and the connection to the dragons that's we kind of suspected in the last episode that's interesting. And it seems now that Kenneth is more empowered to continue his sailing with Vivacia than he was before. So I mean, we'll be interested to see where that goes. But to your point, Dylan, I think there's other characters we got to get into, and we were talking about this right before the show. I think the one person we have to talk about is very much their book is Malta. Which we were talking earlier how Hobb makes us like so engrossed in the Malta chapters and like the drama of the ball and the dating scene and the fashion, because it's rooted in this family drama between Malta and Ronica and Ketrikin that I'm just like, again, super invested in. I think at the very beginning of, Malta's arc in this book, she mentions, because in the beginning they don't know what happened to Wintrow and to Kyle. Like, they have no idea. They're like, oh, he'll be home any minute now. And they just don't know what's befallen them. And so Malta's like, man, when he gets back, he's going to put all these women to rights, And one of the things I had highlighted, because it was such a great, like, here's where she starts and here's where she's going, is Malta had always pitied her father. It was a shameful waste that so handsome and adventurous a sea captain should be married to a mousy little woman with no interest in society or fashion. You're like, dang, that's cold. He deserved a wife who dressed well, one who orchestrated social gatherings in their home and attracted fit suitors for their daughter. Malta felt she deserved a mother like that also. A new thought filled her with sudden alarm. And then she starts talking about, like, what am I going to wear? It's just like, whoa. Malta.
And that's more of the Malta we saw in book one. But what's wild from a character development standpoint is where Hobb takes her from there and how Malta is by the end. I mean, we have this quote that I'll grab from the opposite side of the book, from the one that you were grabbing that one from, which is it's Kefria thinking about how Malta is by the end, and it's she says, I've heard it was to protect himself from pirates on his trip up. So it's like Malta's asking all these questions about like political stuff and how like certain ships belong to a satrap, even though he says isn't. And then Kefria's look at her and says, the girl sounded altogether too disillusioned for her years. Had they done this to her? Had their discipline lessons and chores destroyed the selfish, flighty girl and replaced her with this weary, cynical young woman? It squeezed her heart to think so. So it's like, we have such a different character from the start of this book to the end of the book, and a lot of character development went into making that happen.
Absolutely. And that, I think, is like that kind of loss of innocence, I guess you could call it, because her behavior, like, she's very smart and she was also just super young and naive at the same time. And so when she thinks she's the most clever person in the room and she's taking on Ronica Vestrid and they're like, having this duel of wits, and she's very perceptive. She can read people like a book, and she's been manipulating Ronica and her mom since the first book. She just was young, and all that she knew was, gowns and balls and wanting to appear like a woman. All she ever wanted was to be treated like another adult at the adult table. It's like, I don't want to sit at the kids table anymore. I want to sit at the adult table. And then I think she's realizing all of the burdens that come with adulthood. And then of course that gets exacerbated by the disaster that is the Bingtown Ball, when Davad Restart is killed, Satrap is abducted, they flee. She's watching her whole town go up in flames. Her house is getting robbed. The satrap is making these weird advances on her. She grows up very quickly, and that she was never really illusioned, but there's still kind of this dissolution of, she had a moment I'm trying to find where it's something about how she can't trust men. She had put her dad on a pedestal, and then she was okay, well, that was clearly wrong. It's a kind of a sad growing up story for Malta.
Yeah, because it happened so fast. And she so quickly has to come to grips with everything, starting really when they realize that her dad has been captured by pirates and might be getting held hostage, and they're thinking about, can we negotiate, but we have no money. It's all of this stuff that she's being confronted with, all of a sudden it's just really just changes her. And it's some of it is for the better. She's way more mature, she's way more responsible, she's thinking about other people. And at the same time, it's super sad to see someone have their innocence stripped of them so quickly and so thoroughly. So it's almost like this be careful what you wish for moment for Malta, right? Because it's like you said, all she wanted to do was grow up and be an adult and be a woman, and then all of a sudden all of these adult things hit her and they're awful, and the things she has to grapple with are so much more intense and terrible than whether she gets a nice gown to the ball or not. So it's I want to be grown up and deal with grown up problems, and it's monkey paw curls. Sorry, Malta, this is gonna go horrible.
Yeah, exactly. And they had this whole moment of, I love the scenes with Malta and Ronica. I just do. I don't know. It's kind of they're both are kind of on equal footing, intelligence wise, but one has wisdom and the other one doesn't. And so to see that clash is just always fascinating. And one of the things that they talk about in this is the whole courtship of Rain, Reyn, Rain of the Rain Wilds. Yes. The whole courtship of that, and Ronica trying to put her foot down and being wow, you're stepping in this huge mess of centuries and generations of relationships with the Rain Wilds. And meanwhile, Malta's why do you have to be so dismal? No matter what I say, you always say something to make it not so. I think you just want me to be unhappy forever. And then Malta then goes, I'm sorry, I do not wish... Oh, no, hold on. Okay, so she goes, all you can see ahead for anyone is boredom and toil. Well, my life is not going to be like that. No wonder Aunt Althea ran away. It's just whew. She really knows how to cut into the core of a person, and she's trying to run into this full bracing and ends up, in these moments at the ball where it all just kind of crumbles for her. Except for her relationship with Rain. That turned out pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, by the end of the book, she's making pretty selfless decisions on for Rain, for her father. She's letting the dragon drown her in memories so that the dragon, if the dragon's going to keep keep their word, will leave Rain alone and then save her father. And it's it's just character writing at its best to take Malta from where she was to where she ended up being. I mean, she almost seemed like a throwaway character in a lot of book one, and then she's kind of representing this like just this like spoiled child who's causing issues in this. I'm trying to think of the word. It's like a comedy of manners or something like that.
Right.
Like that's what comedy of manners is. That a genre of realistic satirical comedy that comments upon the manners and social conventions. Yeah, there's a little bit of an element of that in the first book where they're dealing with all the social norms, and Malta kind of makes it a funny situation in those.
There was also the moment though where it got turned on its head. I had totally forgotten about this, and I'm just going through my highlights. Do you remember the moment where Brash and Trell goes to the Vestrit house? And
she's
it's
like flirting with him.
Malta answers the door. Yeah. She's flirting, and he's like, "Oh, don't you look grand today? Are you and your friends playing a tea party then?" And I was just laughing. I was like, I don't think you could have thought of a worse thing to say to Malta. Because we know Malta and Brashen. Yeah. And so we know that this is absolutely hilarious. And we get it from Brashen's POV. He has no idea what he just like bulldozed into with Malta. And meanwhile, Malta's like insulting his intelligence, and he's like has no idea what to do. And then she's like, well, I'm the lady of the house while my mother's gone. And he's like, what? You're like 12. It was very funny.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. Yeah, the worst thing in the world he possibly could have said to her. The most demeaning thing. Well, Brashen also does go through a lot of character development as part of this storyline that brings us to the Paragon and setting the, I assume, the titular mad ship to go on this rescue mission. It was an interesting title for the book, because I'm like, unless I'm missing something and there's a little bit more of a like double play to it, or something about like the Vivacia is also kind of losing it a little bit as Kenneth takes her into his pirating ways and all of that. But
right.
I mean, it's the Paragon stuff is very interesting. I like where it's going, but it certainly doesn't come to fruition in this book. It's kind of one of the, this just feels like the theme with like the Althea side of things is like she starts the first book and you're like, is this the main character? I think this is the main character. And then I'm just like still waiting for like, okay, like, but every book ends with Althea's thing like still completely unresolved, while the other characters are reaching like natural, maybe not end points, but like stopping points by the end of the books.
Yeah, they show growth and depth and maturity and development. The Paragon chapters always read as ominous to me, like okay, like the greater story has yet to be revealed. And this whole, it's like, okay, you've got Ship of Magic, Mad Ship, Ship of Destiny. Is this whole story about Paragon? Like, it's hard to really tell. And even like towards the end of the second book, we still don't know. We're over halfway through this series, and we still are not entirely sure what Paragon's role is in the story. But it is always ominous. And now they have, they decide that, we are going to sail Paragon again. That's kind of the big thing for him in this book, is that he's going to get a second chance, and that
like
Paragon
a fifth chance, it seems like.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he gets sold to Amber, who's another interesting character.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I'm like, Robin Hobb is very purposeful and not getting too deep into Amber's backstory. I'm like, you can't fool me. I know Amber's up to something. I know there's more to Amber than meets the eyes here. I don't know what, but I do know that it's more than we're talking about in this book. So between the two of them and the fact that they're together, I'm like, something significant is in the works here, and I'm not quite sure where that goes.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. Like you said, ominous is a good word for it. We do have there's an interesting moment where they're like buying the Paragon from the Ludlucks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then they like bring the Ludluck woman over for the exchange, just to kind of like in the therapy world we'd call it like a warm handoff. Like you basically have, if you're transferring a client, you like have the old therapist sit in for the first session and kind of like do a little spiel to move from one therapist to the other, like process that kind of stuff. And it seems like that's what they were trying to do, to like make this progression natural from the Ludlucks to like this ship not being owned by the family that it's like memories are instilled in it, and all that kind of stuff.
And it's unprecedented. It goes, like, this is super taboo, super untrodden ground. It's like selling a member of your family, which, funnily enough, the Vestrits actually did. Like, Wintrow went into slavery, so it's just like this horrible thing that's happening, and Paragon almost doesn't even believe it.
Yeah, Paragon's like, oh, if the Ludlucks come, then they'll understand. They'll want me back. They wouldn't let anything bad happen to me. And then they bring this woman here, and she just goes off. She's like, here you have been for 30 years, a constant reproach to my family, a symbol of our shame and our guilt. Every ship that passes in or out the harbor sees you here. There is no one in Bingtown who does not have an opinion as to why you failed. Most lay the blame at our door. We've been called greedy, reckless, selfish, and cold-hearted. Some say we deserved what befell us. As long as you are here, we can never forget nor forgive ourselves. It would be better by far if you were gone. They are willing to take you, and we are more than willing to be rid of you. So she doused them all with her poisonous words. The pain Althea felt for Paragon left her speechless. The woman's eyes bulged with madness. Perhaps, after all, Paragon was made of the same stuff as the Ludlucks. It's like that kind of, I don't know, that writing is so good. Just
it's so, that, like the melodrama that she brings into a lot of these moments is so juicy. Like, that's, we've been saying how talented of a writer she is, but these moments that she's able to create through the world building, the character development, like, we are so enriched by what we know about Paragon and the Ludlucks and Bingtown and what even happened to the Vestrits. It's like we know all these things, and it makes it even harder and more sentimental, right? Because you're even like, well, Paragon's probably in better hands. Like Althea and Brashen and Amber, they're cool people, and they want to they want Paragon to sail again, and like he'd be so much happier with them. That's what we think, but it's still like that's your family who's cast you away. And even if you have this lovely found family of people who only have your best interest in heart, to still have your own family say we don't love you anymore, it just cuts so deep.
Yeah, I mean, we feel it. Like, she's yelling at a ship, and we're still like, I don't know, we feel the same empathy that we would feel for any other character. And something about the Paragon, everything that he's been through, we only know so much about it, but we know he's just had this like tortured existence, and we really feel for him in that moment. So it's credit to Robin Hobb for getting us to care that much about a ship that we now do know is not a live ship, is a dead ship, because
yes.
we do learn, that's what I was talking about at the top, we do learn more about the world building through bits and pieces, and then finally just like all of it being revealed at once, pretty much. But that the live ships are basically like chopped up dragons, like
Right.
the serpents who turn into dragons, who are then referred to as logs, and are, which is wild, and then are like turned into live ships. So that was a pretty interesting reveal,
and it's
and
just
one
like
done in
the
a really
echoes
slow
of
burn way.
a lot of memories put into what is essentially a shell of a egg of a dragon. You know, it's really interesting, and we've seen, even from reading the Farseer trilogy, that to bring a dragon to life, it was this whole thing about like filling it with memories, and that turn the stone into life. And this is apparently like the unborn dragon, and so they were kind of able to like override the hard drive, I guess, and upload their own family memories in it. It's this like perverse thing when you think about it, and it's like the dragon there may still be some sentience of dragon because the serpents are recognizing the ships as,
and it smells
as
like
dragons, and it smells like
it smells like one who remembers. I should say. Yes.
So you've got this weird and Vivacia is having like an identity crisis, and I think it's revealed in this book later, isn't it, like Rain who's like, oh yeah, we messed up with Paragon, that was a mistake, that was our bad. Where you're like,
well, didn't they try to like combine two?
Yeah,
what was it? It was something of like combining
most
multiple
live ships are made from one log of wizard wood, and Paragon's the only one that was made with two fused together.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh yeah, that was a bad idea. We never should have done that. It's no wonder that thing is disturbed. So there's some acknowledgement that like there is some sort of identity in these logs, you know, of wizard wood. These unborn dragons have some sort of entity, and they're related to serpents who, you know, are related to dragons. And it becomes this whole like, okay, the serpent needs to migrate north so that they can become dragons, and you're like, oh, interesting,
because it's the cocoon, right? Like, just try, like, the cocoon is the in between of serpent to dragon, if I'm correct.
So I believe
yes.
so. And so they're in the realm of the elderlings. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, just confirming that I understood what was happening there.
I believe so.
Because, like, an unborn dragon is a serpent becoming a dragon, if I'm correct.
Yes. It's like a chrysalis, I think they describe it. Yeah. Have been performing a horrible abomination, murdering the dormant dragons by using their cocoons as wizard wood logs to make live ships. So it's like taking a metapod and like turning a metapod into a ship mass before it could evolve into Butterfree.
Ain't that the truth?
Ain't that the truth?
In the same and the metaphor works well.
And then Paragon is like Kakuna and metapod
mashed into one,
mashed together in some horrible abomination. Yeah, that's then stuck on the front of a ship.
Yeah, that's some. That's straight out of that horrible episode of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood.
I haven't seen that.
Oh, okay. Well, listeners who've seen that, you know what I'm talking about.
Maybe it's like The Fly, where he gets in the teleporter, and the fly's in the teleporter, and so their cells get fused together, and it becomes a horrible abomination.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, the point is it's not like an unborn dragon in the sense of like, you know, an egg that's just like, you know, just got laid and never had. It's like a thing that's already had a full life as a serpent and is then in the process of turning into a dragon. So, and they call it a freaking log, like dehumanized
Wizard wood
like
log. Ooh,
yeah, they all,
magical.
yeah, it's like
Made by
no,
wizards.
yeah. So it is a horrible, horrible thing that they're doing, and it is creating these like these, even the ones that were not mashed together from two different logs, as they say, are still like kind of tortured by this, like these latent memories that are still in there. And we know that Vivacia is like always talking about like seeing serpents and them trying to talk to her.
And
It's
Paragon's
like,
like, I know
going
you,
on
or
there.
something. Like, you know, he's screaming stuff. And
Didn't Paragon get like really mad at, I can't remember this first book or second book, but got like really mad at Amber when she was talking about like, oh yeah, like I don't know if, I think she said like I saw a dragon at some point, and he was like, how could you know if they were a dragon? Like dragons don't exist, and blah. Like he got really angry about it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something there, but I don't even know if Paragon understands it himself.
Right. That's kind of the scary thing, is that the live ships know something's wrong with them and they cannot figure it out. You know, it adds to the like perverse nature, because they did not ask to be created. They were kind of forced into this thing, and they're like, "Oh my God, what am I? I'm a monster," which is super, super interesting. I think it's curious to see, and to me, it's these dragons. There's mentions of the elderlings. There's the rain wilds. We know the extended lore of the realm of the elderlings, that this is how these stories, these sets of trilogies and all that are getting connected. You know, the discovery of dragons at the end of I keep forgetting, Assassins at Farseer trilogy, and now that dragons have come into this story, and we're just starting to get tales of the elderlings and those memories of what those towns, what those cities, what that civilization was like. We're starting to get some of the greater lore at the end of this book. Don't really see the full picture of how it all comes together. I find the things that I'm most interested in are the direct story of these characters, but the fact that there is something going across all of these series is interesting. I haven't puzzled it out. It's not captured my interest to puzzle out as much as the origins of Paragon and Kenhead and Amber and all these other characters, but it is very interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I'm still in the camp of like read the Farseer trilogy, yes, of course, and it's a great series, but if you want to jump right to the work that I think is the stronger trilogy, I still have no problem recommending just reading the Liveship Traders trilogy. I know that there's parts of this, and we've had folks say on social media, like, I was actually really glad that I read the Farseer trilogy first, and it was because, like, certain parts were, like, those Easter eggs are in there, and certain parts do make more sense, and you can connect some dots for sure. So your mileage may vary, whether it's something important to you or not. If you're a real completionist, you want to understand every single little thing about any connection that could exist. Of course, Farseer trilogy coming first will help you with that. But to me, yeah, the biggest things I care about are stuff happening within the context of this particular story, that you wouldn't need any information coming in. And I don't think it's anything that, like, you wouldn't understand what's happening without having read Farseer. So to each their own, and we're in the lucky situation where we just happen to have already read Farseer trilogies, so it doesn't really matter on our end. But yeah, it's the stuff within this particular story, and to me, this world building element, the restraint, like you said, to some authors, and understandably so, they come up with something really brilliant and kind of grotesque and kind of messed up like this, and they want that reveal to take place in the first book. That's a very reasonable thing to want to do. And
right.
Like, they want that to make their first book as strong as possible and all that kind of stuff. But Robin Hobb, at this point, after having already had massive success with the Farseer trilogy, she has the privilege to be able to be restrained about it. She doesn't have to prove anything with the first book, which is still phenomenal in its own right. But then, she's able to save these reveals until the second book, and it's so much more rewarding when you've gotten to see everything leading up to it. So I can only imagine there's a lot more to be seen in the third book.
As I said, I dove deep into the third book, so I'm so excited to talk about it. But for now, the character we had mentioned her briefly. I want to make sure we round out our discussion. Is Althea, our main character / not really our main character. Althea continues to be interesting to me because she's kind of on this hopeless quest where we know that Kenneth has command of Vivacia, and we know that Vivacia's kind of, and Wintrow are both kind of cool with it at this point. Yeah. And Althea, she just wants to captain this ship for some reason. And as the story goes on, it starts to become more and more apparent of like, is that a noble enough quest for you, Althea? Like, is this something you really want to do? Like, are you sure? And she's gotten so many opportunities, like being on the Othelia, to like, oh, you could be, partnered with this family and be like, the wife of the guy who captains the Ophelia, or you could, go off and be with Brash and Trell. There's just like so many, or you could be with your family, for Pete's sakes, like who needs you home to like help with stuff. Meanwhile, she's off on this quest.
Well, she's helping now.
She's helping now, but only because it serves her self-interest. Yeah. Like, because and I've noticed it's so funny, like, when sometimes, like, action is required from Althea, and her mind just always goes straight to her and being captain of the ship. Like, that is her first concern. When push comes to shove, when the adrenaline starts pumping, like, her niece could be hanging off a cliff, but it's like, I could be captain of the Vivacia. Like, that would be the first thought that would happen. And the second thought would be, oh, I should probably save my niece from dying. It's interesting to see, like, the hierarchy of her thoughts and how always at the top it's being the captain of the ship. And it gets to the point where you're like, at what cost are you pursuing this? You have a family that hasn't seen you, misses you, needs you. You have potential romantic partners who would help you create the life you want without specifically Vivacia. You never really had a connection with Vivacia before she was quickened. Like, what is it that we're pursuing here? And that's the part that I don't think Althea's really faced yet, and I think that's what we're gearing up for. I don't know for sure, but I have a feeling she's gonna be like either a tragic character where it's like, what was this all for, King of the Ashes kind of thing, or she'll learn to let Vivacia go. I don't know, but I can't see it going any other way.
Yeah, I mean, when was the last time Vivacia thought about Althea? It's like she's just not that into you, Althea. It's like Vivacia is focused on Greg is. Let's be real. Greg is very, very into Althea.
He is persistent. Yeah.
Yeah. As is Brashen. Lots of people are into Althea, just not Vivacia, who is the only being that Althea seems very focused on. And I'll say you make such an interesting point there, Charles, about it's like Althea has no relationship with Vivacia really besides the, like, blood is thicker than water, which is obviously inaccurate because Vivacia can't bleed, but the idea of, okay, you're part of the actual family in this
Right.
way, but at
She
the
has a
same
bad
time,
relationship with her sister, a bad relationship with her niece. It's like
yeah,
your real
Althea.
family hates you.
Well, and Vivacia is supposed to be part of the Vester family,
Mhm.
but Vivacia's just at this point like so caught up with Kenneth, and she's turning into a totally different being than she would be under the command of one of the Vestrits. It's like she barely even cares about Wintro, and at least she has an actual relationship with him. It's like
Right.
all Kenneth all the time at this point. So I think where things are head for Althea, like you said, like let's say Althea, this Paragon voyage results in some climactic battle and Althea kills Kenneth somehow or something, right? Like, and they
Mhm.
take back the ship and it belongs to Vestra. It's Kent's out of the way. It's like, Vivacia would be like, what the hell? Like, I actually liked how things were. Like,
Yeah,
why do you think you
yeah.
can just come on board
I
here and now
like
you're my
freeing
captain?
slaves. I was forced to
Yeah.
be a slaver, and that was freaking horrible. Which, thanks for that, by the way. And it's to me this whole thing started because we liked Althea in the beginning, and it was this whole thing of I'm a woman who wants to be a captain of a ship, and we were readily rooting for that. And you have Ronica being like, "Oh, the trader ways, women were strong and independent, and there are women captains, and this and that." And that's changing as the new traders come in, as we marry people from Chaldea, and they have more traditional views, and women are starting to get oppressed. This book interested me in a lot of ways. I wonder if one of the themes is like the failure of men in some ways. Because if we think of how many ways just like male nature has corrupted all of the characters in this story and ultimately led to a town catching on fire, and it's presented in such a way like, oh, Kyle's such a pighead, and the satrap is just totally like what's it called, where all you do is just like do drugs and have sex, and what's that called? But anyway, he's like hedonist. Thank you. Yes, he's like basically a hedonist and an abuser. And then we haven't talked about Cyrilla yet, but her abuse. Malta is being like her putting her dad on a pedestal and then having all the men in her life fail her. Even someone like Davad Restart, which got a lot of screen time towards the end of this book. We spent a lot of time talking about Davad and how complicated he was. And here's
Not
Althea.
so complicated now that he's dead.
Not complicated at all.
But
there was an interesting moment.
Pissed me off.
He did
not
but
like Restart.
Ronica was like, look, so he's got a couple unpopular ideas. That doesn't mean we can't sit next to him at the Thanksgiving table and have a meal and then like put up with him. We can't cast him out as a lecture from society. That was kind of her point, which I thought was an interesting one. It's a very mature thought. It's like loving, if not fully accepting your neighbors and your family and things like that. But here comes Althea, right? And who at the beginning was championing this strong female captain character. I think we're getting a 180. I think she's adopting a lot of these like failure of man like tendencies that, because I think Robin Hobb is more deft than to say all men are bad. I think she has no problems being like, that's the reality of the world, and given the first chance, men are going to abuse women either emotionally or physically or whatever, and she goes into all that. But I think it's like, it's not exclusive to men, and I think she's kind of bringing some of that into Althea's character of like, she's so focused on being the captain of this ship that she's falling into those same pitfalls. And that's kind of where my theory of Althea is right now, because she definitely takes this side seat, and we're watching scenarios going against her favor more and more. And like to the point where like her quest to take Vivacia is now working actively against the main narrative, which is like, let's free slavers and bring serpents to turn into cocoons to become dragons. And now Thea's like, no, I'm gonna stop you all and save my ship that doesn't want to be saved. And so I'm wondering if that's where it's going. It's no theory but my own, but so much of this book is like Malta's failed relationships and like all the leaders failing and Davad failing and politics failing and all these traditional values just being used to corrupt women. And then it gets commented all the time when you talk about the realm of the elderlings, how like society has just collapsed since then, and it all comes to a head when everything literally just collapses, and you're like, wow, we really kind of let ourselves go as a race of beings. And so maybe Althea is part of that cautionary tale of like this selfishness that is going to just cause more rifts than actually help anybody.
That is really intriguing, Charles.
And welcome to my that's my master class.
Yeah, TED Talk. Yeah, it's
TED Talk. Yeah, that's what I should say.
Yeah, I never thought about it thematically in the way of like the book is about toxic masculinity, which is basically what you just laid out, and that Althea is kind of taking on those toxically masculine traits that are causing society to go awry. I mean, I was just trying to think. I was like, are any of the men in this book portrayed in a positive light? I'm like, maybe Rain seems like a decent
Brashen,
dude.
He does do drugs and he gets with Althea, which is kind of uncomfortable in the beginning.
I'm also like wondering how old. I've been trying to figure out how old Brashen is. Maybe it was stated in the first book, but I'm like,
I don't know.
This dude,
he's the older brother, so you must think that he's like, I think he's significantly older than Althea. Maybe not to where it's like predatory.
But is he like in his 30s,
like
or is he like 25, or is he like? I don't know. Maybe it's been stated, but in my head when we were first introduced to the character, somehow in my head he was more like in his 30s, and like Althea's young, right? Isn't Althea like around 18 or something? So it's like
she is young.
And he even in the Malta chapter, as she starts flirting with him, he's like, like it's hard to tell. Like maybe she's becoming a woman. And it's like, dude, that is so gross. She's 13. Like I know the society. Like I'll give a little like cultural humility here that in the society they are like presented as women when they're 13, and that's what's considered acceptable in that society. So I'll give
apparently
credence to that, but still
Althea's around 18 at the beginning of Ship of Magic. Let's see. So Brashen was kicked out when he was 14, and that was 10 years ago. So he's 24. So it's like a 25-year-old and an 18-year-old. You're like, that's kind of weird. It's above board technically, but it's still like, what's a 25-year-old doing hanging out with an 18-year-old,
Yeah,
so,
it is.
And you had drugs to the,
Yeah, it was a lot. There was some questionable stuff. In my head, it was even worse. And clearly in this society, like 24 and 18 would not be like in the society in the books. 24 and 18 would probably not be like frowned upon at the level it would be in our society. Even in our society, like there's just this like, okay, well, legally that is allowed, but that dude is creepy. Like that's pretty much how it's
pretty much
how it would be perceived here. So yeah, there's a little bit of something's a little off, it feels like, with Brashen, but generally I guess he seems to be a better person than most of the guys in this book. Really,
I
Rain
felt for
seems
Althea a little bit though. Like in the first book when they talk about like how she was taken advantage of by one of the crew members. And then in this book, there was a passage that broke my heart a little bit that Althea said. She had to admit to herself that this was without her father. He had reverted. She had to admit to herself that was true. The drunkenness, the sin, the whoring around, she added harshly to herself, calling herself a whore. Ruthlessly, she stripped the truth of her foolish embroideries. She had been pretending he had been infatuated with her when he bedded her. The truth was that she had been behaving like a slut, and she found the partner she deserved. To prove it to herself, all she had to do was think about how they had parted. The moment he realized that she had come to her senses and was not going to allow him her body, he had turned against her. Shame flooded her. How could she have been so stupid and foolish? If he ever returned to Bingtown and spoke of what they had done, she would be ruined, just like the Three Ships girl that he had left in his wake. And it's like, ooh, that
self-shaming,
the harsh self-shaming, and also like the double standards so subtly like put on blast in that too. And it's, if he ever returned and spoke of what would happen, she'd be ruined. He'd be fine, but she'd be ruined. And it's just like the self-worth and the lack of self-worth, and you feel for her. I mean, that quickly gets remedied later on. Like, I don't know, they have this will they won't they thing, and it's the sting from that gets alleviated quite a bit, but still it's like that's harsh. And I felt for her, I still do. Poor Althea seems like such a troubled person, like her one moral guiding light, her dad, was taken away and she's not on the ship anymore, and she's been trying to prove herself and find her own identity by being part of the crew on a ship and sleeping in the hold and skinning animals in the first book, to now being on the Ophelia and being second mate or first mate or whatever. Just
You're
trying
saying on the Paragon?
No, on the Ophelia. She sails on the Ophelia.
You're saying at the end of the first book and then going...
At the end of the second book, she serves aboard Ophelia, and that's when they get stopped at the port.
That's in the beginning of the second book.
Oh, is it the big? Okay, and that's when that's how she gets back to Bingtown in the Ophelia. And that's when she meets that other guy who's courting her, and she's like, it's a sensible match, but I'm not really feeling it, and I want to be able to have my own life outside of waiting for you to come home, and you getting to be the one captaining a ship and not me. I can't live with that. Yeah. No, thank you. Which is another interesting dynamic. So, I don't know. It's tough. You feel for her, but it's... as the plot goes on, it's like her motives become less credible as the reader. At least for me, I'm like, I'm not rooting for you as strongly as I was, 600 pages ago. I don't know.
Yeah, she just fits the check boxes in so many ways of what would be like a main character in a book like this, and a protagonist, where it's like very clear motive of something they want, something that feels like righteous, or at least did when Kyle was in charge of the Liveship. It was like Kyle was such a buffoon and so incompetent that it was like,
it was a great character.
Yeah. But I don't know. At this point, it's like we feel for Althea's plight because she has to overcome all these, like, this patriarchal society, and she's getting screwed over and over again by that. And like, she's even when she ends up as second mate on the Paragon, it's because she's a woman. And she has to deal with all of these things that we're used to seeing a protagonist deal with and overcome. But then, when you step back and you think about her motives, it's like, wait, what? Like, do we even want this? Like, do we care about this? Does this even make sense?
Exactly.
And you're not supposed to, like, the protagonist is supposed to be, like, saving the world or something. And it's with Althea, we just aren't aren't quite there. And I don't know
But
the world seems in peril. I don't know who's going to save it.
So interested in is the eventual clash between Althea and Kenneth. It seems like that's a meeting that we are going to we're building up to, and I'm assuming that's coming in the third book. I don't know. They don't seem like they're exactly at odds. I mean, Althea wants the ship, and Kenneth's not going to give it up, so they're going to clash. But it's like it'll be interesting to see the dynamic between those two if and when they finally meet, whether it be on the decks of the Vivacia. I don't know, but that would be exciting after all this time.
It would be. I mean, I just feel like this whole thing gives me even more appreciation for the nuance that Robin Hobb approaches her writing, especially her character writing with. Is like, I keep finding myself doing something I never thought I would do, which is compare Robin Hobb to Joe Abercrombie over and over again. But
the influence,
I don't know, just like the moral grayness of the characters, the ambiguity in terms of what you're supposed to even be rooting for or wanting to happen, but keeping you enthralled and engaged by a compelling story even when you don't know what you really want to happen. I mean, that is a gift that few writers have, and I think Abercrombie and Hobb are definitely two that.
And the balance of restraint with the narrative while also not holding back when it comes to killing your darlings is to over summarize it. And the last character we really didn't touch on that we can mention a little bit here at the end is Cyrilla, who you never one of those things was where it's just the captain's like the satrap is threatening to hand you over to the captain and he can do whatever horrible things he wants to you. It's like you get those threats, and Cyrilla just seems so she's been manipulating the satrap for years. She's playing this dangerous game, but she knows how to throw her weight around, and then that just totally fails. And it was an thankful choice to not show any of the abuse as it's happening, but to have Cyrilla just be changed afterwards of she's in the captain's quarters and she's talking about the horrible time that she has had up to that point. And it hits hard for a character that you pretty much just met, was introduced in this book, the newest POV character. And you never think that necessarily you would go there sometimes with certain characters and just the way they're being set up, and then boom, they go all the way, and it was done in a way that was tough to read, but also again it comes to it was so pointless what happened to her, and it affected her so irrevocably. And you think about Kenneth, who is going through something similar, and even Althea has some of these issues around what happened to her. Was she abused or not? I mean, Cyrilla got it the worst, maybe Kenneth too, but you just it's raw and it's depressing, and you're not really quite sure where Cyrilla's going by the end of this, but the way she was able to cope with what happened to her in parallel to how Kenneth is coping with what happened to him as a child. It's kind of interesting to compare the two.
Yeah, and you mentioned how raw it is. I mean, for Kenneth, we've seen what he's become when he's had years to, I don't know if the right word for what Kenneth did is process. It's definitely more repression than processing.
Just cut himself off from all feeling and emotional connection,
every feeling he could
connection.
possibly have. Yeah. Even if there might be, I still think there might be a little desire to do good inside of. I don't know. He just the other thing is, I know all his advice when he's trying to tell people what to do. As his little, I'm going to be the king of the pirates, I'll tell you what to do. It's always good advice. Yeah. I'm just saying. But
he is
anyway.
a good leader.
I don't know. There's something there. But maybe I'm just fooled every other character around
by
him.
his ways.
It's that Kenneth. So anyway, but yeah, with Cirilla, you just see her before it happens when she's all like poised and she's like a character you couldn't imagine that happening to. And then, like you said, there's those threats, and you're like, but that won't actually happen. Like, Hobb won't actually go there, right?
Right.
Hobb, like, again, like an Abercrombian type thing. It's just like, Hobb just doesn't care if she wants to take a character, like wherever she wants
Past
to take
the
them
point
after
of no
they've
return,
gone through after they've gone through rape and sexual abuse and all of that stuff. It's just she's gonna have it happen, and it's like Hobb doesn't have that reputation for doing that kind of stuff that some of the like grimdark authors will always have, but she'll go farther, it seems like, than a lot of them. And I mean, I don't know. She shocks me sometimes, and that was one of those moments that was shocking. And like you said, we're grateful there was no beat by beat version of that. It was more retrospective after it had been happening, but it's still just horrifying the way that just the complete like indifference that Cirilla has toward like her own life and toward like everything she once cared about in the immediate aftermath, like the numbness that she has when she's dealing with the satrap after that is like
the numbness, but also in certain moments that intense burst of fear and survival instinct. I like there's like moments where all of a sudden she's realized that, you know, she's with a man and the man closed the door and they're in the room together and she starts panicking. It's like those vulnerabilities are like, wow, that is like a horrifyingly true, scary detail. And it's just the tragedy of what has happened to this person before and how it has affected them now. Like, they may not be in danger of being sexually assaulted in that moment, but they have, you know, post-traumatic stress, and it's a trigger, and it's a very common symptom. It's like, you got to be sensitive to those kinds of things. And she doesn't know that about herself. You know, she's not a student of psychology, and so she's just like, she thinks she's weak, or that she has to now grasp at power and be more strict to kind of compensate. And that has gotten her into a little bit of trouble as she learns how to be a leader. And it's those kind of things that keep you in and gripped and flipping through the pages. And I don't know, I could go on all day, I think, Dylan, but at some point we gotta bring it in for a landing.
Yeah, I think we do. Well, I think the Searle stuff is still a lot of, we'll see where things go. Yeah. We didn't get a lot from her, and we didn't get any clear like stopping point for her, really. It just kind of keeps going, so we'll see where that goes. Then really the book kind of keeps moving in the direction of this, like the serpents in terms of prologues and I believe an epilogue in this one too, right, Charles? With
we get Tentiglia the dragon. That's an interesting development.
I mean, there's still a lot to unravel. You compared it to the like thread of the White Walkers, kind of in our first episode. It's
we get a little more context now, but it's kind of, those were always the vibes. They're like a little flavor.
And
Realm of the Elderlings flavor sprinkled on top.
Yeah, there is this sense of like, okay, we have all of these more grounded aspects to the story of like, okay, like Althea v. Kennett, like that's gotta happen, and that's more of a human thing going on. And then it's like, in the background of all of this are serpents and dragons and like these creatures holding in memories of their entire
Wizard
kind and bringing like sentience. Bringing like, it's like all of that is going on. You're like,
realm of elderlings cavern like that no one cares about. You're like, isn't anyone curious about all this magical technology.
And someone like broke Malta. Malta's broken.
Yeah,
something not right with her.
Malta's like bossing around the satrap right now.
Yeah, she is. That's actually kind of fun watching like Malta, who used to be like a spoiled little girl, is now seeing the satrap as a spoiled little boy that he is, and Malta's become the practical one. I mean, but Malta's brain is all like fried from this being flooded with memories thing. So it's like,
right.
But anyway, point being, we've got these serpents and dragons and stuff all in the background. It's like, how is this all going to fit into the end of this series? So it's going to play a crucial role. We know that. So there's a supernatural element that you can almost forget about at times, but it's looming in the background. And it's going to be important. So how will that go?
All the magic we do understand is some kind of perverse interpretation of the real magic. Like no one, whether it's the Rain Wilds or Big Town, understands the real magic at play. Everyone's just kind of fumbling around, especially the Rain Wilders.
Yeah. So, Charles, I feel like we've fumbled around probably enough trying to figure out what's going on with Robin Hobb's genius installment in the Liveship Traders series. So I don't know.
2 books down, 1 more to go.
Yeah, I think we'll have a little more direction by the end of this whole thing, and that'll be the next time we're talking about this series when we get to Ship of Destiny. I can't wait to read it. I know you've already dove in, so I am thrilled to be covering this series. This is one of my favorites in a long time, and no one I'd rather do it with than my lifelong friend Charles. So thanks for having this chat with me, Charles. I think,
it's my pleasure, Dylan. Yes. Thank you as always. You know, who else would talk to me for an hour and a half about Mad Ship by Robin Hobb? You know, very few in this world, and that's why we do this, you know. And
but on our top tier on Patreon, you can get the right to talk to Charles for an hour and a half. No, we have no Patreon.
No. This is for the love of the game.
This is love of the game.
We don't want your money. Keep your filthy money. We just want
give
those
us ratings.
Yeah, and ratings and downloads and all that other source of validation that's, you know, not monetarily connected. 100%, 100%. And let's get that outro music going.
This one got away from us right at the end.
It got away, but we forced it back, much like we forced the cocoon of a dragon into the mast of a live ship. In some way, we formed the outro here, and here we are. Thank you, everyone, one and all, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. If you like what you heard today, and you want to show us some love and support, the best way to do that is over on the socials. Follow us and engage with us over there. That's at the FTF Podcast on Instagram and TikTok, and at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end on Twitter. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard on the show today and they want to support us even more than following us and engaging with us over on social media, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, which you can do over on Spotify, where most of you are listening. Just go to the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast feed, click about, and then click where the stars are. You know how many to give us. And you can also rate and review on Apple Podcasts. That means that you can say nice things about us. You can say, hey, Charles, I would love to talk for an hour and a half with you about Mad Ship, and, you know, reach out on social, see if Charles will respond and set up a nice time with you. I'm sure that he'd be just dying to do that. So Charles loves the attention on social media. That's what he loves. But you don't have to reach out to Charles on social media, because just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for doing that.
Just listening, guys. So much more than enough. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you. You guys are the real heroes, the ones who made it to a minute 30 plus. You guys are awesome. Thank you all so much.
A minute 30.
I mean, an hour, 30 minutes plus. I mean, the people who made it a minute and a half, too, they deserve some recognition.
They deserve a lot.
All right. That's a lot to ask for someone to put up with us even for that long. So thank you all You done it. You made it to the end, and we love you for it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And as always, guys, go forth and conquer, friends.